I stepped through Daniel's doorway the second he told me not to, refusing to wait one more minute for the truth he kept burying. The apartment smelled like sleepless nights and fading excuses, and he looked at me as if I'd walked in holding a mirror he didn't want to face. I felt the weight of every mile and every silence between us, but I didn't let it slow my breath. I just told him I was here. He said they didn't need me. His voice cracked like a lie slipping out of its shell. I stared back, steady, knowing this moment was the debt neither of us could outrun. And in that thin space between his anger and my fear, I heard the question he wasn't brave enough to ask. How far would I go for him now? The room held its breath. A truth was coming, sharp as broken glass, and neither of us was ready to bleed for it. What does a mother do when her name becomes a door he keeps locking? How long can distance protect a heart trying too hard to stay strong? And if love means showing up when you're told not to, who pays the price for that kind of courage? Daniel asked why I came now, as if time had ever waited for either of us. I told him I came because silence had grown too heavy, because something in his voice last night felt like a door cracking open. He looked away, pretending he didn't hear the worry beneath my words. The apartment felt smaller with every breath, like truth was pushing the walls inward. He tried to say he was fine. I let the lie hang there thick and trembling. Sometimes you can tell a child is drowning even when they insist they're standing on solid ground. He finally asked what I wanted from him. The question cut deeper than he knew. I told him I didn't want anything, just the truth. His jaw tightened, the same way it did when he was little and afraid to admit had messed up. The room felt colder then, as if honesty demanded a draft. He kept insisting things would work out. I wondered how long he'd been repeating that line in the dark. I asked him why the bills were unopened. He said they weren't mine to worry about. His voice cracked on the last word. I saw the truth then. The weight, the fear, the stubborn pride holding him upright. There are moments when a mother knows the battle in a child's chest better than he does. This was one of them. And he hated that I could see it. He told me again they didn't need me, but his voice was softer now, almost pleading. I realized he wasn't pushing me away. He was trying to protect whatever pride he had left. I didn't argue. I just met his eyes and let him see that I wasn't leaving. Sometimes staying is the only way to speak love without saying a word. Daniel tried to move past me, pretending he had somewhere else to be, but the truth was written all over the room. His clothes were piled in corners, dishes stacked in the sink, and the bills had grown into a kind of quiet avalanche. I asked him how long it had been like this. He didn't answer. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, the way he does when he's cornered by his own choices. I felt something inside me tighten, not in anger but in fear. Fear of how much he'd hidden, fear of how deep he'd sunk, before finally letting me see the surface. He said he just needed time. I told him time doesn't pay debts or fix nights spent awake with panic scraping at your ribs. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost ashamed. And still he wouldn't look at me. That was the part that hurt the most. How badly he wanted to stand on his own even if it meant falling apart in the dark. He finally told me the job fell through months ago, and he'd been trying to pick up side work to keep up. Every word sounded like it hurt coming out, like truth had to scrape its way past pride. I asked why he didn't call me. He said he didn't want to be that kind of son. I didn't know what that meant. Maybe needy, maybe weak, maybe human. I told him help isn't a weakness. He laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound someone makes when they're trying not to cry. I felt the distance between us shrink, not from comfort, but from the weight of everything he'd carried alone. He looked at the floor again, but this time his voice broke. He said he didn't want me to see him like this. I whispered that I already had. I asked him how much he owed. He tried to shrug it off, but the tremble in his breath told a different story. When he finally spoke, the number hung in the air like a storm cloud. It wasn't just overdue bills. It was loans, fees, interest piling like bricks on his chest. I felt the familiar ache of a mother, wanting to fix everything and knowing that fixing it might break him in another way. He kept apologizing, saying he didn't mean for it to get this bad. I told him I knew, but he needed to understand that hiding pain doesn't make it go away. It just grows teeth. He looked up then. Really looked at me. And for a moment I saw the scared boy he used to be. The one who always tried too hard to be strong. I asked him who else knew. When he didn't answer, I realized the truth. No one. Not his friends. Not anyone he trusted enough to reach out to. He'd been carrying all of this in silence. The kind that eats at you from the inside. I told him that pride can be a cage if you bolt the door too tight. He didn't argue. He just sat there, breathing hard, as if every confession stole another piece of the mask he'd been wearing. I reached for one of the envelopes, but he grabbed my hand, telling me he didn't want my money. I told him I wasn't offering money. I was offering a way not to drown alone. He finally asked what I expected from him. I told him nothing. Just honesty. That's all I ever wanted. He looked confused, like no one had ever told him that truth alone was enough. The room felt different then, calmer, but still trembling underneath. He said he didn't know how to start fixing things. I told him we would start with the truth, and the rest would come. For the first time since I walked in, he nodded. A small nod, but real. And in that moment, I felt something shift. A crack in the wall between us, letting in the first thin line of light. Morning crept into the apartment like it didn't want to disturb the mess we'd uncovered. Daniel avoided my eyes while pacing the room, and every step sounded like blame dragging across the floor. He said he didn't want to argue. I told him I wasn't here to fight. I was here because he'd been fighting alone for too long. That set him off. He said I left first. The words hit harder than he meant them to, but I let them land. Sometimes the truth stings both ways. I told him leaving doesn't mean stopping loving. He looked at me then, angry and hurt and exhausted. He asked why I always show up when everything is already on fire. I wanted to say he never let me in sooner, but I didn't. Some wounds don't need salt. Just space to breathe. He finally stopped pacing and asked why I never fought harder to stay. The question cracked something in me I didn't know was still breakable. I told him I left because staying had turned into a battlefield, and I didn't want him growing up thinking love was the same as chaos. He swallowed hard, like he knew exactly what I meant, but wished he didn't. The quiet between us stretched thick and fragile. He said he never blamed me for leaving. I told him that wasn't true, because no child walks away from a parent without carrying at least one unanswered question. He didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor, as if the truth lived in the grooves of the wood. I asked him what he wanted from me now. Really wanted. Not money, not quick fixes, not silence, just truth. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then sat down like the weight of that question pushed him into the chair. He said he didn't know how to need me without feeling like a failure. The confession shook something loose in both of us. I told him needing someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. He looked up sharply like he wasn't sure if he believed me or desperately wanted to. I told him I wasn't here to rescue him. I was here to stand with him. There's a difference. His eyes softened at the edges, the anger fading into something quieter, something closer to hope. He finally said there was more he hadn't told me. My stomach tightened. I told him to just say it. He rubbed his palms together, breathing like he was bracing for impact. He said some of the debt wasn't his alone. He'd co-signed for someone who disappeared the minute things got bad. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I asked who it was. He hesitated too long. That was all the answer I needed. I knew then it was someone he cared about more than himself. Someone who didn't care back. And I saw the shame in his eyes, sharp and deep. But I didn't let him drown in it. I told him everyone makes mistakes. It's what you do after that matters. I asked him if he still believed he didn't need me. He didn't answer at first. He just looked around the room like it held a way out. Then he whispered that he didn't know what he needed anymore. That was the truth I'd been waiting to hear, not because it made him weak, but because it made him real. I told him we'd figure it out together. His shoulders sagged as if those words finally gave him permission to stop pretending. For a moment, the room felt less like a battlefield and more like a place where healing might begin. Not quickly, not cleanly, but honestly. The day stretched heavy, like the air itself knew something was about to crack. Daniel sat at the table, tapping a pen against an unopened envelope, his breath uneven. He said he didn't understand how everything got so out of control. I told him problems don't explode all at once. They leak slowly, until you're drowning without noticing the water rising. He flinched at that, but didn't argue. Then he admitted he'd been lying to himself long before he lied to me. The honesty hit the room like a gust of cold air. I told him truth isn't meant to hurt. It's meant to break chains. He looked at me with those tired eyes, like he wanted to believe that, but didn't know how. I felt the old ache return. The one that comes when you realize someone you love has been carrying a burden too big for their shoulders. And still, he tried to lift it alone. He finally said the name, Marcus. I felt my breath catch. I knew the boy only from Daniel's stories. Quiet, messy, always in trouble. Daniel said he thought he could help him. Thought loyalty meant saving someone even if they were sinking. I told him loyalty isn't love if it destroys you in the process. He sat back, rubbing his chest like the truth hit somewhere tender. I asked him if Marcus ever paid him back. He shook his head. I asked if Marcus ever even tried. The silence that followed was answer enough. Sometimes the people we fight hardest for are the ones who leave us bleeding. Oh, he asked if I thought he was stupid. I told him no. He was hopeful, and hope can blind you if you don't protect it. His throat tightened as he admitted he kept waiting for Marcus to come back, to take responsibility, to say something that made this mess feel less like betrayal. But that day never came. I moved closer, speaking softly so the truth didn't crush him. I told him trust isn't a weakness, but giving it to the wrong person can feel like one. His eyes glossed. The kind of shine people get when they're holding back more than tears, when they're holding back years of disappointment. He asked how he was supposed to forgive himself. I told him forgiveness starts the moment you stop running from your own reflection. I asked him if he'd heard from Marcus at all. He shook his head, jaw tight, shame burning just beneath the skin. I told him loss hurts, but being used hurts deeper. He didn't want to hear that. He stood abruptly, pacing again, anger rising in hard breaths. He asked how he could be so blind. I stepped toward him, telling him he wasn't blind. He cared. There's a difference. Caring makes people vulnerable. It also makes them strong enough to face the wreckage. He finally stopped moving, stared at the floor, and whispered he didn't know how to start over. I told him starting over doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing differently. He finally stopped pacing and looked at me like he was seeing something new. Maybe strength he'd forgotten I had. Maybe the truth he'd spent years avoiding. He said he didn't want to make the same mistakes again. I told him that wanting to change is the beginning of change, and he nodded as if those words gave him a place to stand. The room felt still then, like the storm inside him had paused, just long enough for him to breathe. I told him mistakes don't get the last word unless you let them. His eyes closed for a moment, and when he opened them, something softer had settled there. Maybe clarity, maybe surrender, maybe the first small seed of healing. The evening settled into the apartment like a warning. Daniel sat across from me, hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He said he didn't want my money. I told him this wasn't about money. It was about choosing whether to keep sinking or start climbing. His jaw tightened, the old pride rising like a wall he couldn't stop rebuilding. I reminded him that strength isn't measured by how much you carry alone. He looked away, swallowing hard. I could feel the moment balancing on a thin wire. His hope on one side, his fear on the other. He said he was scared of leaning on me again. I told him fear doesn't mean stop. It means hold on. For the first time, he didn't argue. But he didn't agree either. He just breathed, heavy and unsure, and I let the silence do the talking. He finally asked what would happen if he said no, if he chose to handle everything on his own. I told him that was his right, but it came with consequences. Not punishment, just reality. He'd face the debt, the calls, the pressure, all without a safety net. His throat bobbed as he swallowed that truth. He asked if I thought he could do it. I told him he could do it, but he didn't have to. That's when he broke, just a little. His eyes shimmered, and he blinked fast like tears were a weakness he couldn't afford. I didn't reach for him. I let him sit in the truth long enough to understand it wasn't meant to crush him. It was meant to free him from pretending. He whispered that he didn't want to fail again. I whispered back that asking for help isn't failure. It's courage with a cracked voice. I laid the paperwork on the table. Every bill, every overdue notice, every number he'd tried to avoid. He stared at them like they were ghosts from a life he didn't want to remember. I told him we would go through them one by one, but only if he agreed to be honest, completely. No more hiding. No more trying to look stronger than he felt. He dragged a hand through his hair, frustration and shame tangled together. He said he hated needing help. I told him everyone needs help sometime, even me. That made him look up, surprised, maybe even relieved. He whispered that he didn't know where to start. I said, "Start here. Sit with me." And slowly, carefully, he did. He pointed to one bill, the biggest, and said Marcus had promised to handle half. The anger in his voice carried more hurt than rage. I told him promises don't always mean loyalty. That truth didn't comfort him, but it steadied him. He leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands, whispering that he felt foolish. I wanted to tell him he wasn't, but I knew empty reassurance wouldn't help. Instead, I told him wisdom often comes from the scars we collect trying to love the wrong people. He lowered his hands, eyes red, but clearer than before. He asked how he was supposed to move on from this. I told him moving on isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to carry someone else's damage anymore. I told him we needed a plan, not panic. He nodded, slow but real. We divided the bills into piles. Urgent, negotiable, manageable. For the first time, he didn't look crushed by the task. He looked present, awake, willing. He said he wanted to do this right. Wanted to stop running. I felt something warm thread through my chest. Not victory, just connection. He asked if I would stay through the process even when it got ugly. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. And for the first time since I walked through his door, I saw something small but powerful settle on his face. Trust. Fragile. Trembling. But alive. The next morning felt different, not lighter, but clearer. Daniel sat at the table again, staring at the piles we made, his breathing steady in a way I hadn't seen in years. He said he didn't know why it took hitting the bottom to finally tell me the truth. I told him sometimes pain is the only thing loud enough to break old walls. He nodded, eyes fixed on the papers like they held both his past and his future. He said he wanted to understand why he pushed me away for so long. I didn't push him for answers. I let the moment settle. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. He said he thought needing me made him weak. My chest tightened. I told him loving someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave enough to stay when leaving would be easy. He didn't speak after that. He just breathed, steady and real. He asked me if I blamed him for shutting me out. I told him blame is easy. but understanding takes courage. He looked at me then, really looked, and something in his expression cracked open. He said he'd been angry for so long he forgot what it felt like not to be. I reached for one of the envelopes, tapping it lightly with my finger. I told him anger is just fear wearing a louder mask. He let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh, almost a sob. He asked me how I wasn't furious with him. I told him fury is useless when someone's already drowning. What they need is a hand, not a storm. He looked down, wiping his face with his sleeve, and whispered that he didn't deserve mine. I told him that's not his decision to make. I sat beside him again, close enough to close the distance, but not close enough to crowd him. He asked me why I kept trying after everything. My answer wasn't poetic. I told him because he's mine. Not in a way that traps him, but in the way roots belong to the tree. He blinked, unsure if he believed me, unsure if he could. Then he said something I never expected. He asked if I forgave him. The question hit deep. I told him forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a path. And he'd already taken the first step by telling the truth. His shoulders trembled, and he leaned back, covering his face again. But this time, it wasn't shame. It was relief, breaking through old armor. I put my hand on the table between us, not insisting, just offering. And slowly, he placed his hand near mine. He told me he felt ashamed, not just of the debt, but of needing me after saying he didn't. I told him shame is just the shadow left behind when we start telling the truth. He stared at the floor, as if he could still see the version of himself he wanted to be. I told him that version wasn't gone. It was just buried under too many apologies he never said out loud. He whispered that he wanted to try again, not at life, but at us. Those words hit with a softness sharper than any anger could be. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without breaking. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's the smallest admission made in the quiet. He asked me what happens now. I told him now we rebuild, slowly, honestly, without pretending we don't hurt. He nodded like those words anchored him to something solid. We sat together, sorting the last of the bills, not as mother and son divided by years of silence, but as two people finally telling the truth. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. He said he was ready to face the consequences, ready to take responsibility, ready to change. I believed him, not because he said the right things, but because for once, he wasn't hiding behind pride. He was standing in the open, exposed and real. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the rescue isn't pulling someone out of the fire. Sometimes it's giving them the strength to walk through it. The night settled quietly around us, as if the world wanted to give us room to breathe. Daniel sat on the couch, shoulders not as tight, eyes not as restless. He said he still felt guilty, like every step toward healing came with a shadow trailing behind him. I told him guilt can guide you or drown you, and only he could choose which it would be. He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that truth. He said he didn't want to be the reason I hurt anymore. I told him he never was. What hurt was the silence, not the struggle. He looked down, hands clasped, breathing steady. For the first time, it felt like he wasn't hiding behind anything, not pride, not fear, not anger, just himself. He asked if rebuilding meant forgetting everything that happened. I shook my head. Forgetting is easy. Healing is the hard part. He sat back, letting my words sink in. He said he wanted to become someone I could be proud of. I told him pride isn't earned through perfection. It's earned through showing up. He looked away, swallowing emotion that threatened to surface. I didn't push him. I just told him, I'm here. That was enough to break something open in him. Something softer. Something real. He whispered that he was tired of pretending. I whispered back that he didn't have to anymore. I told him we would call the companies together. make arrangements, take the process step by step. He let out a slow breath, the kind someone releases when they finally decide to stop running. He said he was scared of failing again. I told him failure only wins when you stop showing up. He nodded, eyes wet but steady. Then he said something I'd been waiting years to hear. He told me he was glad I came back. The words were quiet, but they echoed through the room like a door opening. I didn't answer right away. I let the moment breathe. Then I told him I was glad I didn't stay gone. He asked if I thought Marcus would ever apologize. I told him some apologies never come, not because we don't deserve them, but because some people can't face the damage they caused. He nodded slowly, letting go of a hope he'd held onto too tightly. He said he didn't want to chase after people who wouldn't choose him back. I told him that was growth, the kind that comes with bruises, not bitterness. His eyes dropped to his hands, and he whispered that he was ready to move forward. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but honestly. And that honesty felt like the truest beginning we'd ever had. We walked toward the door together, not because I was leaving, but because he wanted to stand beside me as he faced the next step. He said he didn't know if he could erase the damage, but he wanted to try. I told him healing isn't about erasing, it's about choosing what comes next. He breathed in slowly, steadying himself. He asked if I believed in him. I said yes, not because he was fixed or flawless, but because he finally stopped hiding. He smiled, small, shaky, but real. And as we stood there in the doorway, I realized something. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone grow into the version of themselves you always hoped they'd become. He didn't need every dollar I had. What he needed was something I never stopped offering. My hand, my voice, and the truth that he was never alone.